If you believe a father's love never dies, even after 20 years of silence, then stay with us, because what happened on this episode of Family Feud is going to stop you in your tracks. And before we go any further, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss moments like this one. What you're about to see left Steve Harvey speechless, brought a studio full of strangers to their feet in tears, and reminded every single person watching that some bonds simply cannot be broken, no matter how much time tries to destroy them. There was a time when family meant everything, when a father's presence in the home was not just a comfort, it was a foundation. But what happened to one man on Family Feud would restore your faith in second chances. When Steve Harvey saw what was unfolding right there on his own stage, he did something no host had ever done before. He stopped the entire show. Marcus Allen was 53 years old. For nearly 2 decades, he had carried a weight that most people will never fully understand. The weight of a father who missed everything. His son's first day of high school. His graduation. His wedding. The birth of his grandchildren. Marcus had missed all of it, not because he didn't care, but because of a series of choices made in a dark season of his life. Choices that had cost him everything that mattered most. Marcus grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, the son of a steelworker father and a schoolteacher mother who sacrificed endlessly to give their children a better life. His parents had instilled in him values of hard work, discipline, and family loyalty. For a time, Marcus lived those values faithfully. He married young, had a son named David at 22, and worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat. He was the kind of man his father had raised him to be. But the pressure of those years, the financial stress, a struggling marriage, and a battle with alcohol that crept up slowly before it consumed him completely, led Marcus down a road he never planned to travel. By the time David was 7 years old, Marcus had walked out. Not because he didn't love his son, but because, as he would later say with tears streaming down his face, he didn't know how to be the man his son needed him to be, and rather than figure it out, he ran. For 20 years, David Allen grew up without his father. His mother, Patricia, worked double shifts as a nursing assistant to raise him alone. She never spoke badly about Marcus in front of David, but the silence where a father should have been spoke louder than any words. David grew up to be a quiet, determined young man. A high school coach in Atlanta who poured into other young men everything he wished someone had poured into him. He got married, had 2 daughters of his own, and built a good life. But there was always something missing. A conversation that had never happened, a door that had never been closed properly. What David didn't know, what none of his family knew, was that for the past 6 years, Marcus had been sober. He had rebuilt his life slowly, painfully, and with tremendous humility. He had found faith, completed a recovery program, held steady employment as a warehouse supervisor in Memphis, and spent years writing letters to David that he never sent. Letters that sat in a shoebox under his bed. Letters full of apology, full of explanation, full of a love that had no outlet and no address it dared to visit. It was Marcus's sister, Evelyn, who had the idea. She had been watching Family Feud with her own children one Sunday evening when the thought struck her. What if this was the way? What if a moment on national television, neutral ground, public accountability, with Steve Harvey as the steady hand, could be the bridge that no private phone call had managed to build? She applied for the family without telling either Marcus or David the full plan. She simply told Marcus they were going on a game show together. She told David's wife the truth, swearing her to secrecy. The setup was in motion. Neither man knew what was really about to happen. The day of taping arrived on a warm Thursday morning in Los Angeles. Marcus flew in from Memphis wearing a pressed blue shirt his sister had picked out for him. He was nervous in the ordinary way people are nervous before a game show, fidgety, making small jokes, rehearsing possible survey answers under his breath in the green room. He had no idea. On the other side of the studio, David had arrived with his wife, Renee, and 2 teenage daughters, thinking they were filling in for a last-minute cancellation, which was technically true. He was relaxed, smiling, helping his daughters with their lip gloss and reminding them not to scream too loud when Steve Harvey came out. When the 2 families were brought to the stage, and the curtain separated them in the pre-show staging area. Marcus caught a glimpse through the partition gap. He went completely still. His sister put her hand on his arm. "Just breathe," she told him. "This is the moment you've been praying for." On the other side, David was talking to a producer when he turned and noticed the name on the opposing family's team card sitting on the judge's table. ALLEN, Marcus Allen, Memphis TN. David's jaw tightened. He turned to his wife. She looked at him with soft, steady eyes and squeezed his hand without saying a word. He knew she knew. Steve Harvey walked out to the roar of the audience, his signature confidence filling every inch of the studio. He introduced both families, starting with David's side, the Allen Washington family from Atlanta. Warm applause, easy smiles, David's daughters waving to the cameras with big grins. Then Steve turned to the other side. "And we have the Allen family from Memphis, Tennessee, Marcus, Evelyn, and the rest of the crew. Welcome?" The audience applauded. Marcus raised a hand in acknowledgement. His eyes moved, just once, across the stage to David. David was already looking at him. The eye contact lasted no more than 3 seconds. But something shifted in the room. Steve Harvey, a man who has spent decades reading human emotion on live television, felt it immediately. He paused, his head tilted slightly. He looked from one man to the other. A small crease appeared between his brows. "Wait a minute," Steve said slowly, the microphone dropping just slightly from his usual showman's height. "Hold on. Do y'all know each other?" Silence. The audience quieted faster than audiences usually do. Something invisible had passed through the air, the particular electricity that only real, unscripted human moments produce. Neither Marcus nor David spoke right away. Marcus looked down at his shoes. David stared straight ahead, jaw working. Evelyn stepped forward. "Steve," she said carefully, "these two men are father and son. They haven't spoken in 20 years. I brought them both here today because I didn't know any other way to get them in the same room." The audience erupted. Not in celebration, but in that breathless collective sound that happens when a group of strangers suddenly finds itself in the middle of something deeply, privately human. Steve Harvey stood completely still. Then he held up one hand to the production team. "Stop the clock," he said quietly. "We're not playing a game right now." A producer in the wings gave the signal. The game board went dark. The studio lights shifted almost imperceptibly, warmer, softer. The music that plays between rounds faded out. Steve walked to the center of the stage, equidistant between the two podiums, and looked at Marcus. "Brother," he said, "come over here." Marcus walked slowly, like a man carrying the full weight of 20 years in each step. Steve looked at David. "Son, come here." David's daughters watched their father walk forward. The older one, who was 16, pressed both hands over her mouth. The younger one, 13, leaned into her mother and began to cry quietly. The three men stood in the center of the Family Feud stage. Steve Harvey between them, one hand on each man's shoulder. The audience had gone completely silent. "I need to ask y'all something," Steve said, his voice lower and steadier than his hosting voice, the voice of a man who has lived hard things himself and knows how to stand in them. "And I need you to be honest with me. Not for the cameras, not for the audience, for yourselves." He looked at Marcus. "Do you love your son?" Marcus Allen's face broke open. "Every single day of my life," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Steve turned to David. For a long moment, David said nothing. His hands were clasped in front of him, his shoulders tight, his eyes bright with emotion he was working very hard to contain. He was a coach. He was used to being the composed one, the one who held it together while others fell apart. "David," Steve said gently, "what do you need to say to this man?" David Allen took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep inside him. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but raw, the voice of someone who has rehearsed something 1,000 times and is still not ready to say it. "I needed you," David said. "I needed you at my graduation. I needed you when I didn't know how to talk to my wife when things got hard. I needed you when my daughters were born and I didn't know if I was doing it right." He paused. "I became a coach because I wanted to be the person for other kids that I didn't have, and for a long time I told myself that was enough, that I'd made peace with it." His voice dropped. "But I haven't made peace with it." Marcus was trembling. Tears moved silently down his face. He did not wipe them away. "I know," Marcus said, "I know, and there's nothing I can say that makes up for it. Nothing. I was a coward. I was sick and I was weak and I chose myself when I should have chosen you. Every day that I've been sober I have lived with that. Every single day." He reached into the pocket of his blue shirt with a shaking hand and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at the creases, slightly yellowed. "I wrote you a letter," he said. "I wrote you a lot of letters. I never sent them." He held it out. "This is the last one. I wrote it last week, because Evelyn told me something was happening, and I didn't know what, but I stayed up all night and I wrote this." His voice cracked completely. "I want you to have it. You don't have to read it now. You don't have to read it ever. But I need you to know it exists." David looked at the letter. He looked at his father's outstretched hand, older than he remembered, with new lines and new calluses. He looked at the man who had been a ghost in his life for 20 years, standing 3 feet away on a game show stage in Los Angeles, offering him a folded piece of paper. He took it. And then David Allen, high school football coach, husband, father of 2, a man who had spent 20 years being strong, stepped forward and put his arms around his father. The studio erupted. Not polite applause, not the enthusiastic noise of a game show, something rawer and more real. The sound of 200 strangers weeping and cheering simultaneously, some on their feet, some holding each other, some with their hands pressed to their hearts because they were watching something that reminded them of their own unmade calls, their own unsent letters, their own father or son or daughter or mother they hadn't found the courage to reach yet. Steve Harvey stood to the side, one hand over his mouth, eyes shining. He let them hold each other for a long, uninterrupted moment. He did not speak. He did not need to. When the 2 men finally separated, both of them undone and unashamed about it, Steve stepped back between them. He put a hand on David's back and looked directly into the camera. "I have been standing on this stage for a long time," he said. "I have seen families win money. I have seen people make history. But I have never, not once, seen anything like what just happened on this stage today, and I want everyone watching to understand something." He paused. "It is never too late. I don't care how many years have passed. I don't care how deep the wound is. If the love is real, and what you just witnessed is real, it is never too late to start again." David's 2 daughters had come onto the stage. The younger one walked directly up to Marcus, the grandfather she had never met, and hugged him without a word. He held on like a man who had been given something he knew he did not deserve and was going to be grateful for every moment of it. The game eventually resumed. Both families played. And if you're wondering, yes, the Allens won the main game, but nobody on that stage or in that audience was thinking about the money. When the taping wrapped, Steve Harvey did something he rarely does at the end of a show day. He came back out after the credits and sat down with Marcus and David in front of the remaining audience and talked with them for nearly 40 minutes. No cameras, no production script, just 3 men on a stage, talking honestly about fatherhood, failure, forgiveness, and faith. He asked Marcus what the hardest part of sobriety had been. Marcus said without hesitation, "Accepting that I had hurt people and I couldn't undo it. I could only change what came next." He asked David what kept him from reaching out over the years. David was quiet for a moment, then said, "Fear. I was afraid he didn't care, and I decided it was easier to live with that assumption than to find out it was true. But that assumption was killing something in me. I just didn't want to admit it." Steve leaned back and said, "You know what that is. That's pride dressed up as self-protection. I know it because I've worn that same outfit." The audience laughed softly, the warm, knowing laughter of people who recognized themselves. Before Marcus left the studio that day, David's wife Renee introduced herself properly, with a real hug, not a cautious handshake. She told Marcus that his granddaughters' names were Aaliyah and Grace. She told him Grace had his same gap between her front teeth. Marcus laughed for the first time all day, a big, surprised, unguarded laugh, and looked at Grace, who grinned and pointed at her own gap proudly. 3 weeks later, when the episode aired, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The clip of Steve stopping the show went viral within hours. By the next morning, it had been viewed more than 40 million times across social media platforms. News outlets covered it nationally. Therapists shared it with their clients. Pastors played it in Sunday services. Teachers used it in classroom discussions about forgiveness and generational healing. But the more important things happened off camera. Marcus Allen drove to Atlanta the weekend after the taping. He did not stay in a hotel. David's family gave him the guest room. That first night, Marcus sat at the dinner table with his son, his daughter-in-law, and his 2 granddaughters and ate a home-cooked meal for the first time in years. Aaliyah, the older one, had made a playlist of songs she thought he might like. Grace showed him every single trophy her father had won coaching. Marcus sat in that living room and absorbed all of it, quietly, gratefully, not trying to make up for lost time all at once, just present in the moment that was in front of him. David read the letter that first night after his daughters went to bed. He sat at the kitchen table with it for a long time. When Renee came downstairs to check on him, he was still sitting there, the letter folded back in his hands, his face calm. "He said he was proud of me," David told her. "He'd been watching. He knew about my coaching record. He knew the names of my girls." He paused. He'd been watching from a distance for years because he didn't think he had the right to get closer. He folded the letter carefully and put it in the drawer where he keeps the things that matter. 6 months later, Family Feud honored their promise and ran a follow-up segment. The audience watched footage of Marcus at one of David's football games, standing on the sideline in a school hoodie his son had given him, cheering with a level of volume that suggested he was making up for 20 years of missed games in one afternoon. They watched Marcus and Grace baking together in the kitchen. She had decided she wanted to learn everything her grandfather knew about cooking, which, it turned out, was quite a lot. They watched David and Marcus sitting on the back porch in Atlanta, just talking, the easy way men talk when the hard conversation has finally been had and they're on the other side of it. Steve Harvey, watching the footage in the studio, had to take a moment before he could speak. When he did, he said something that became one of the most quoted lines from the segment. "That porch right there. That's what forgiveness looks like when it's done." Not a dramatic scene, not a big speech. Just 2 people sitting together, not going anywhere. David's older daughter Aaliyah, now 17, had written an essay about the experience for her college application. She described the day she watched her father walk across a game show stage and hug a man she had only ever known as the grandfather we don't talk about. She wrote about what it taught her. That the people who hurt us are often carrying their own wounds we never got to see. That forgiveness is not the same as saying the harm didn't happen, and that sometimes the bravest thing a family can do is sit in the same room with all of the truth on the table and choose each other anyway. She was accepted to her first choice university. Marcus Allen continued his recovery, one day at a time, the way he always had. But now he had a reason to call on Sunday evenings. He had granddaughters who texted him pictures of things they thought were funny. He had a son who sent him coaching highlight videos with the message, "Thought you'd want to see this." He had a place at the table. He would tell people later, at his recovery group, at his church, at the warehouse where he supervised the night shift, that the most important thing he had learned from all of it was not that forgiveness was easy. It wasn't. It was hard and slow and asked both men to keep showing up even on the days it felt awkward or incomplete. What he had learned was that it was possible. That a man who had lost everything could, with enough humility and enough time, and one unlikely Thursday morning in Los Angeles, find his way back. Steve Harvey closed the follow-up segment by speaking directly to the camera, the way he does when something has genuinely moved him. "If you're watching this right now," he said, "and there's somebody in your life you haven't called. A father, a son, a daughter, a friend. I want you to hear me. Don't wait for a game show. Don't wait for a perfect moment or the right words or a guarantee that it's going to go well. Pick up the phone, write the letter, show up. Because Marcus and David almost missed each other forever, and they had 20 years they can never get back. Don't let that be your story." He paused, then smiled. The real smile, not the hosting smile. And if this moved you today, if this reminded you of someone you love, please share it, like this video, subscribe to the channel, because stories like this one deserve to travel. They deserve to find the person who needs them. The Allens. All of them, both sides, Marcus and David and Renee and Alia and Grace and Aunt Evelyn, whose quiet, stubborn love had engineered the whole impossible thing, took a family photo together at the 5-year mark. It hangs in Marcus's apartment in Memphis and in David's hallway in Atlanta, framed in identical frames that Alia ordered for them as a Christmas gift. In the photo, they are all laughing. Grace is pointing at the gap between her teeth. Marcus is looking not at the camera but at his son, the way a man looks at something he was afraid he would never have. The caption Alia wrote underneath the copy in her own room reads simply, "Better late than never." But don't word count to Lou for 500 words. Estimated video length 18-22 minutes at 120 at 152 p.m. Optimized for 45-65 demographic pacing. Call to action placements. Act 1's early engagement hook and Act 5's closing reinforcement. Both CTAs are woven naturally into the emotional narrative rather than interrupting it. Framework alignment. This script follows all 5 acts of the ultimate YouTube automation script framework. Moral hook, character setup, the struggle, the turnaround, and the legacy, with pacing and emotional beat structure calibrated for the 45-65 audience profile.